gosh, 3 years now. I love that forum. I think it's a great group on Facebook. I've met wonderful friends there and lifelong friends and great mentors for making mead. So that brought me to my first home win at Mazer Cup was in 2018 with a blueberry mead, as Pete called it, bomb, which was blueberry bomb, which turned into our commercial blueberry mead called Elliot, and which I'm actually sipping on tonight to inspire me on where this all started for me. So I came from a wine background, and I wasn't very interested in anything very sweet. I like big dry reds and varietal whites, and then occasionally you'd see me get into a really nice port, but it was very small pours. And many of you have heard my influences, and many people in my area have been influenced by Ken Schramm. And when I first had a bottle of Madeline's first birthday, a friend shared with me, I said, "Oh my gosh, this is sweet, but it's amazing and delicious." And that kind of influenced my decision to go forward and try to pack as much fruit as I could into a mead, and essentially what I consider really a fruit wine in a lot of ways, with still keeping honey as the majority. I like to say 51%, but usually it's more like 60 or 65%, even in these big berry bombs and melomels. You know, as far as sugar contribution goes. So after that, I started. I had my background being around Michigan. There's a lot of great fruit in Michigan, a lot of great honey, and we have it's my backyard playground. It was a great place to get grapes to make wine, so it was also a great place to get fruit. And in my homemaking days, taking trips to Michigan was really what I focused on, and finding fruit and then trying to ferment it. So the blueberries are something that spoke to me, and I just happened to make a good one, and then I got lucky in a competition. Basically, I wasn't really a competitive mead maker, and I'd already had plans to go commercial, ideally, and that kind of just solidified my confidence a little bit. Sources and disclaimers. This is just my opinion here. I don't claim to preach the gospel of mead making. There's a lot to learn always, and I don't have all the answers. And I am an advocate for experimentation above all other things and keeping an open mind. So anything I say today in this presentation is really meant to just be something that I've experienced, so you can take it for what it is. And I encourage everybody to put anything I've said to the test, and everything, all of their own confirmation bias to the test as well. I think that's very important. And I continue to do that, even looking at this presentation that I got together in January, I do believe. Even since then, looking back on it today to review it, I've learned quite a bit since then. So I want to say that that's the number one takeaway from this, if anything, is to just keep playing around, keep talking to people, and never feel like you have it all figured out, and never feel like there's only one way to do things. I'm going to talk about a lot of process and stuff here, and it's just ideas and experiences, a lot of it anecdotal. And I encourage everyone to keep experimenting. So let's move in here. Let me move my chat box so I can see. So we're going to talk about the pros and cons of max fruit. We're going to talk about RS versus BS. BS stands for back sweetening in this case, versus a little of both. Residual sugar versus back sweetening versus a little of both. Selecting and preparing fruits, which I think is very important. Mixing your must, it's often a challenge, especially when dealing with whole fruit. So that's something that we're always looking for more efficient ways to do. Calculating EOG. When I say EOG, I'm referring to estimated original gravity. And that's a very important thing when using whole fruit. And I think it's often something people find overwhelming, because we're talking about water contribution of fruit, the solids that are going to be removed, and the sugar that is contained therein. And there's some pretty complicated calculations that go into that, and you can get pretty spastic on how close you get, and I'll talk a little bit more about it later. nailing the start, I think the most important part to anything, whether it's a business or making mead, is a good starter. In this case, it would be a yeast starter. I think that's very important, especially when we're talking about extremely high original starting gravities here with lots of sugar or very low pHs. Some of them exceeding 1.2. I know it sounds crazy. A healthy starter is very important. So learning how to make a starter and starting off and having everything you need and preparing yourself for the fermentation is of the utmost importance, in my opinion. Process efficiency, that links right back to everything else. In Elliott, I get about 65% efficiency. That's pretty much quote unquote a no water mead. There's only water added for the nutrient addition and the starter. So, it's kind of red wine style, and I rely on a lot of methods to get that maximum efficiency. Fermentation additions, I'll talk a little bit about some of the things I use and other things, different products from Scott's Labs and such, ways that I find I get better efficiency or may help body or overall aromas and fruit character. And then the chemistry of high residual sugar meads, talk a little bit about that. So move on to the next slide here. There we go. Pros and cons of maximum fruit. Those are some red currants you saw briefly there. So all the flavor, obviously, that's a big one. All the flavor. The more fruit flavor you're going to get. The bigger the mead, the more honey you're going to need as well. So honey is a huge contributing factor. So everyone's looking for a dense, big mead with a lot of flavor. At least in this talk we are. It's not always the case. We like lighter stuff too, but that's what we're focusing on. So more fruit, more flavor in general, and then maximizing that through efficiency, through process efficiency. So natural sources of yan, fruit is a great natural source of yan, which, yeast assimilable nitrogen. And most of us are familiar with what that is, but this allows us to use less nutrient. In my case, I use a lot of ferment, and that can be a little tricky. You can get really high if you add a little too much ferment with a big fruit bomb like these. You might attenuate higher, and you might end up finishing meads pretty high, which I have verified often in the last couple of years, getting pretty high in the ABV structures. Naturally occurring balancers by the way of acids and tannins. I'm not one who likes to add acid and tannin post fermentation. There's nothing wrong with that, but for me, I prefer to find that in the fruit. So combinations of fruit, different acidities of fruit, the tannin structure of fruit. For example, a red raspberry, the starting pH of a red raspberry might be 3.1, 3.2, whereas a black raspberry might be upwards of 4. There's higher acid in the red raspberry, and there's a much higher tannin content from the seeds in black raspberry. So those two kind of have different building blocks of creating the structure and the balancer of the residual sugar. The improved structure of your mead naturally, I think more fruit, more tannin, more acid, sometimes higher alcohol. All these things contribute to a bigger mouthfeel, a bolder mead, a beautiful mead, one that legs around your glass and meniscus that could float a boat. And I find that visually pleasing and very satisfying to make. So that's definitely some of the big pros in making these big berry bombs. Cons. There's a lot of cons, as you can see the mess there from one of the first ones we ever did in a stainless fermenter, red wine fermenter. And that is let's see, I believe that is actually Elliott. That's the bottom pool of Elliott. And in that fermentation tank, there was approximately 1,400 pounds of blueberries. So difficult calculations. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes it's difficult to really nail down the sugar contributions of your fruit. They have different sugar contributions, and it's important to know that. They also have different water contributions and solids that are likely going to be removed after fermentation. So that's a con, I'd say. It makes it more difficult. The expense, obviously, whole fruit's going to be expensive. Gets a little less expensive when you're buying it by the pallet, but nonetheless, it's a big commitment when you're spending $10, $12 a pound on some premium black raspberries, and you get them shipped to your house, which costs $100 in shipping. So that's obviously a con. Everyone knows that. Labor intensive, I would say that's a huge con. While making a traditional mead out of just honey, water, and yeast might be the most difficult thing to do well, in my opinion, in the mead world. It's also, once you nail it down, a lot easier and more efficient. So the labor intensity part of it can be daunting. There's a lot of preparation and there's a lot of stuff to deal with post fermentation. High risk with high gravity. Stalled fermentations are definitely an issue. It takes some practice. We've all been there. Different people have different ways of mitigating that risk. But that's definitely a big con, is you are kind of throwing fire into the wind, and you're saying, let's try this. So that's definitely a con. Risk of being out of balance, that's definitely a possibility. If you make a red currant mead with 7 pounds of fruit per gallon, depending upon how big that residual sugar is, you might have a huge gut-wrenching stomach bomb. But people can do it when they practice and they get good at the balancers, as we talked about. Lower yields, that's obvious. Already talked about that a little bit, mostly with whole fruit. Not so much an issue with juice and concentrate, which I will get into a little bit later. All right. Residual sugar versus back sweetening versus a little of both. With some red currants or black currants there. So I make a lot of residual sugar targeted final gravity meads. It takes a lot of practice to kind of get your setup down. And even then, you end up making adjustments, and it doesn't always go how you planned it, even if you've done it 5 times. So that's always a risk, as I stated earlier. I just had a mead 6 months ago get into 22.8% range dry, and it happened really fast, and it was an ambient ferment at 85 degrees, and I didn't believe it until I got it lab tested. So I would have told myself a year ago that I was full of crap, and turns out that I wasn't. So that was an eye-opener for me, that it can happen, and it's something I had done many times before. I still don't know why it happened. I have my ideas, but you always got to be prepared for the fermentation kind of taking on a will of its own, so to speak. So ABV tolerances, that steps right into what I was just saying. Don't trust your yeast. ABV tolerances literally means nothing, in my opinion, when you're talking about all of the yan involved in fruit, especially when adding more nutrients. And when you get really good at treating your yeast right, they will go a lot further than the tolerances. So I put that in quotes for a reason. Fermentation temps, I've experimented on all ends of the spectrum, and they all have their advantages. And we all know you can do really good at ambient temps with the right yeast choice. You can throw off a lot of great esters with the right yeast choice at ambient temps. You can do warm ferments, like coming from the red wine world. I've done fruit bombs at 90 degrees internal Fahrenheit and held it there. I've fermented stuff at 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So they all have their pluses and minuses. I, once again, will default to experimentation as king. Stopping a fermentation, I know that's taboo a lot of times, although a lot of times we do try to do it, at least in the targeting residual sugar world. And if we don't stop it, we at least slow it down and coax it into stopping, because a lot of times we're going to have to add a little bit of honey back in if it goes too far, or we might not get the balance we want. So then we're talking about getting really high alcohol, and then we're talking about real high final gravities. And from where I'm from, high final gravities and residual sugar are the norm. So letting a high gravity fruit bomb finish on its own, that's ideal. It's great. I know a lot of amazing mead makers that are mentors that are just excellent at nailing the residual sugar method and pitching with all of your gravity points in the beginning and ending up pretty much where you want it to be. I still go with this method most of the time, and I'm fairly decent at it at this point, but like I said, you always get a surprise. That's definitely in the challenge department. So that's your advantages. I mean, I think they far outweigh the risks. If you really want to get all that dense fruit, there's really no other way around it. You just got to take the risk. So let's move on. Back sweetening, the other method. There's nothing wrong with back sweetening. I do it all the time. I don't have one way. And I've made huge fruit bombs with back sweetening. I've back sweetened with honey. I've back sweetened with various different concentrates. Usually I prefer concentrate to juice because I'm not the dilution isn't as much as the factor, and you can really add the density of the fruit, and you can really tailor your end product with the acid contribution of different concentrates and the varietal contributions of different honeys. So I think back sweetening is great. Oftentimes I do a little bit of both, and I have several styles where I try to do one or the other, and that's kind of how they're designed. But I think to be a diverse mead maker who's ready for anything, you need to be able to be comfortable with both methods. The risks of slow stalled ferment to achieve desired ABV, I kind of already discussed that. If you're going to try to target residual sugar, you're going to risk not having it go as planned. Back sweetening gives you that control, so there's a huge advantage there, and you can really have a repeatable end product. And I really do like that about it. And there's a lot of commercial stuff we do at this point that we do a little bit of both, but the shelf stuff that we want to be consistent year after year oftentimes involves back sweetening. So those are the general advantages of back sweetening, and I think most of you are aware of that. But you can make fruit bombs with back sweetening, and you can make fruit bombs with targeted residual sugar. So I'm definitely not simply an advocate of one over the other. I think that it's both are tools in the chest of mead making that you should have. Step feeding, kind of tag that at the end there. Step feeding is kind of, I guess, in between, but to me, it's almost targeted as well. But step feeding is a great method to learn as well, and you end up kind of doing that if you screw up a targeted residual sugar mead, because you might need to get extra sugar in there. So all these are great things to be comfortable with, and they should definitely be exercised, in my opinion. And here we have, I believe, some mangoes. Selecting and preparing your fruit. Lots of talk about this all the time. That's actually a picture of Elliott blueberries that I took for our batch one Elliott of Manic Meadery's batch one Elliott a few years ago. Those are Michigan blueberries, and that shows the varying size of those deliciously sweet and tannic berries. Fresh, frozen, local, or import. I use all of the above. I love fresh fruit. If I can get fresh fruit that's local, give it to me. I'll eat it and I'll ferment it. Frozen fruit, there's great options. You can make awesome mead out of bags of Costco fruit. You can make awesome mead out of bags of Aldi fruit. You can get wonderful fruit from Northwest Wild Foods and Currency and the other different places that really have high quality stuff that's IQC and sometimes block frozen. There's just great options, and most of us know we're going to be freezing our fruit anyway. So I try to go local when I can, but I love to take in fruit from other states. This country's so diverse in its fruit. So for me, I can't stay away from as much fruit as I can get. So reach out and grab as much fruit as you can from wherever, as long as it's quality. Measuring your sugar content, huge important thing. And that has to do with efficiency, process efficiency. And I recommend everyone has just a cheapie, at least, optical Brix refractometer for fruit, and you can get a pretty good idea of the sugar content. These berries here, off the top of my head, were probably right around 12.5 Brix. If anyone needs to know, that's about 12.5% sugar. So that's a real key, and we'll see a little bit later about how important that is to developing your recipe and deciding what the sugar contribution of your fruit's going to be. Preparing whole fruit for fermentation. So I freeze my fruit, as do I think most of you, to get maximum efficiency. I don't wash fruit. I just don't have the time or the space commercially to do it, and I don't think it's really necessary. I do it more red wine style like that. So I'm not an advocate of doing that, although it's not going to hurt it if you wash it. Do be aware, though, that washing fruit can moisten it and also create different mold and other things that you weren't quite ready for. I also don't sulfite fruit that much prior to fermentation, unless I get some cider or something that may be going a little wild on me, or I get some fruit that maybe is overripe. But in general, I freeze it and then I thaw it, and I don't use the sulfites in the beginning. I have plenty in the past, and I think it's perfectly good practice. But for me, I cut out as many steps as I can as a commercial mead maker, and that's one of them that I cut out. Balancing fruit types and amounts to fit a desired flavor profile. I love doing that. I love mixing fruits. I chose these blueberries, these Elliott blueberries, because they are the most tannic and acidic blueberry that I know of, while maintaining a very high sugar content. They're also one of the least commercially desirable blueberries, and so you can get them at a fairly good price at the end of the season because they're the last to be harvested in the Michigan and Wisconsin area. So finding the blueberry that's going to give me what I want really determines how much honey I'm going to use and where I want to go with it. If you use a blue crop from the store that's sweet for your pancakes, you're not going to have the same effect. So just within the 28 different blueberries, and I just made that number up, but it's a lot of different varieties of blueberries that they grow in a 60-mile radius of me. All of them have different flavor profiles. So just like honey, a blueberry is just as complex and diverse. So really pay attention to the fruit, taste it, and know what you're tasting. Feel free to take pHs on it, and definitely know the sugar content. Very important stuff. Concentrate, juice, and puree. Sources and what to look for. This is an interesting topic, and I'm still learning every day. I get samples from everywhere constantly, and I'm always tasting things. And I have a lot of great friends that hand me the information they get, and we share stuff because we're always on the lookout for that, perfect concentrated peach puree or cranberry concentrate. I mean, there's just so many different manufacturers and so many sources. So I say, like anything else, taste as many things as you can and find out what works for you. But I generally, I don't know why, but it seems like a lot of stuff that says organic generally tastes better. I have no clue why that is. I also know that there's a lot of sulfites in concentrates that we're not aware of. So if you think you're not using sulfites and you end up back sweetening with a concentrate, or you're fermenting and you have a real slow start, sans the low pH, it also might be because there's 300 ppm of SO2 in your concentrate. So that's something to be aware of, and they're not required like we are to put it on the label. So it's a little, it can be a little daunting, but if you have an issue with fruit, or you're tasting sulfites, or you titrate and you end up with off the record, I can't titrate this readings, it might be because the concentrate you used post fermentation to back sweeten had a lot of SO2 in it. So the general advantages, I think we all know this as well. I don't really use puree, although there are certain styles I'd use it for. I use it hardly at all. Mostly concentrate and juice. Juice is great during fermentation. Concentrate great post fermentation and during fermentation. I love concentrates for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that you can really dial in the density of the fruit you want. If you juice those blueberries I had, you're going to end up with a 12% sugar juice. If I use a blueberry concentrate, which I actually don't, but if I did, I could make a 24% sugar blueberry concentration juice, which is technically more max fruit than whole fruit. But you're going to have a lot of other things to deal with, so it's an interesting dilemma. But concentrates have great value in mead making. And in combining with whole fruit, I love this method. I do a lot of stuff with this, where I might make up I'm releasing a 5-berry mead next month that is elderberry, blackberry, blueberry, blackcurrant, and raspberry. And it involves elderberry, raspberry, and blackberry concentrate to make it the must. And then I add in whole Elliott blueberries and black currants. So I'm kind of doing a combination, and it increases my process efficiency, and it really allows me to dial in certain fruit flavors, and I get some of the advantages of both worlds, which I really like. It's not the end all be all. I don't think it's the only way to do it, but it's definitely something to play with. So concentrate meads, whole fruit meads, a little bit of both. Let's do it all. Mixing honey with fruit. That might be one of the more difficult things we have to do sometimes. So honey and fruit temperatures, obviously, when you're thawing fruit, it's going to be cold. Generally, when we're thawing fruit, it's going to sit out in 5-gallon buckets or 4-gallon buckets for nearly 2 days, breaking down very carefully and watching it while it kind of macerates and the enzymes break it down, and we're waiting to mix it with honey. I find that warming your honey up a little bit is very helpful if you have that capability, whether it's a sous vide or a water bath or sticking it in the Arizona sun or in your car. A little bit of warm honey will go a long way in helping out, because I don't let my fruit get much past 60 degrees before I mix it, because I want to really mitigate natural fermentation or mold. So warming up honey is nice. Paddles and mixers. Oh man, there's so many different things you can use. In a home scale, I use a big potato masher and mix that stuff up, because we all know that that's the challenging part, is getting that honey in solution with the very macerated and liquefied fruit that you just made. So I know a lot of you play with drills and different attachments. That can be great. Keep in mind, the more you beat up a fruit like a blueberry, the more of a slurry you're going to get, and the harder it's going to be to extract mead when you're done. But you can get great results. Something like a black currant might be a little easier because it has a tough skin, and you're going to get a lot of floaties, but you'll be able to separate the liquid quite a bit when you want to extract it post fermentation or in the middle of fermentation or whenever you do that. Pumps, yeah, I mean, commercially speaking, I think flexible impeller pump to pump honey is insanely handy. I like one that's 2.5 inches to 3 inches, so I can use it as a must pump as well. We do this a lot when we're making big fruit bombs. We're going to recirc in the tank, which also introduces oxygen prior to pitching yeast. I really enjoy that, and I also use that for pump overs. So anyone who wants to do this commercially, I recommend spending the money on spending $5 or $6 grand on a nice pump that can handle fruit solids at different variable speeds, and then also pump honey. And then you can get yourselves some drums of honey and make your life a little bit easier when you get bigger. So what do we have here? Is the video? Yeah, look at that. That's an example of me pumping over Elliot. So I don't punch this mead down because you can hurt your back. This is not a very wide fermenter. This is a 1,100 liter batch, but I keep this hooked up and I pump from the bottom over the top, and we'll just work our way around. We do this a couple times a day. This makes it a lot easier to punch down, and it circulates the must pretty well and keeps stuff mixed up, especially in the early days of fermentation. Calculating estimated original gravity. Looks like we have a triple berry mead there. So measuring your sugar, honey, and concentrates. Pretty easy if you have the right refractometer. In the picture, you have a very inexpensive little Amazon or wherever imported refractometer that is great for doing honey and concentrates. I believe it goes up to around 90 bricks. Very important to calculate your honey's sugar contribution if you want to nail it, because you're not going to be able to take a gravity right away when you mix it up. So everything's estimated, and that's what I mean when I say EOG. So we want to know, I know that I use the Got Mead calculator quite a bit. I think it's got a lot of use to it. And one of the things is their default on there is, I think, 79.2% or something sugar. I have yet to meet a honey that's 79%. Generally, honeys are for my experience, are usually in the 81 to 83% range, and I've had stuff that was lacking moisture content that was even higher. So that's important to know if you're going to be trying to calculate this on paper to hit your target gravity in the end, and then have a good idea what your alcohol content is. So always recording what you put in is important. Take your honey bricks, take your concentrate bricks, take the bricks of any juice you use. Whole fruit, take the bricks of that. Puree, take the bricks of that. So hydrometer works for a lot of those things. Refractometer is much better when you're talking honey. Obviously, you can't do much with the hydrometer unless you're going to dilute the honey. And that little Anton Par Easy Dens every mead maker should own if they want to shell out the $400, because it's an incredible tool that is probably our most used piece of equipment in the meadery. So yeah, record all your sugar contents if you want to be accurate. Calculations with whole fruit, pre and post prep. I kind of talked about this a little bit, but we bulk freeze our stuff in pallets when we get it, or it goes straight to the freezer location, and then it's trucked back to our location here. It's put in these 4-gallon buckets. When we put them in, it's full. This is actually a picture with some honey mixed into it. But usually we're about 50% less volume when it thaws. So it kind of works out really good. We get about 22 pounds of blueberries in one of these 4-gallon buckets when they're frozen. And then when they thaw, we're getting about 2 gallons of nice macerated blueberry goo. So you're looking at, in general, my efficiency is about 10 to 11 pounds of fruit in a gallon. And this is almost always across the board, depending on the fruit though. When it's broken down properly and in its own liquid, you're going to get about that. Then I can use that same bucket after the 2 days to add the honey in, and then we can combine all that together. It's a very labor intensive process, sometimes involving, upwards of 200 buckets. So there goes the labor part of it. That's where a must pump can really help you out in the end. And we're not big enough to really have the machinery to do it all in one big container, but buckets still work and we can still lift them. The dilution factor, talk a little bit about that real quick. Obviously, the water content is going to make a big difference. So I think the Got Mead calculator has, I've talked to Vicky about it for a minute before, and I love the calculation. I think it does a great job if you plug in the correct sugar contents for your fruit. So changing the defaults is of the utmost importance. And man, it estimates really good gravities as long as you take care of the data that you're putting into it. Let's see, H2O percentage. I really don't know what I meant when I wrote that, but that's water. So yeah, I mean, and the efficiency, I kind of mentioned that already. So I think we can move on. So I have time for everything. Nailing the starter. That's, like I said, one of the most important things in my opinion. Selecting the right yeast. There's so many yeast you can use. Just know that some are going to stall out faster in general, and some are going to go a lot further in general. Some are going to be more pH sensitive in general. People have good results with things other people don't. So always experiment, number one rule. I have a lot of yeast I give to beginners that I think are great for this. Of those, I would say DV10 is a workhorse for me. It's one of the least low pH sensitive yeast known to ferment down to like 2.8, 2.7. It's pretty insane. And that's very important when you're working with very acidic fruit. Selecting the right yeast is important. Pitch rate. I've been all over the board on this. Generally, I pretty much stop at 4 grams a gallon as long as I start my starter correctly and I get everything healthy off the bat. I spend a lot of time making starters. I start the starter when I start making the mead at the beginning of the day. I might build that starter up all day. And slowly, I don't just temper it for an hour until it comes in within temp. I'm not in a hurry to get that starter in there. I want it to be going. I kind of bring the mead to the starter and then bring the starter back into the mead. That's my method, and I think it works great. I've yet to have too many issues commercially after really nailing that. So proper rehydration, I do use Go Firm. I think it's a fantastic product. I can't imagine not using it at this point because it's so consistent. So I think we're all pretty much familiar with that. Oxygen, I've done a lot of research on oxygen, a lot of experimentation. I don't really do a lot of oxygen anymore, but I do like using it in the starter if you have it available. Generally, when you're whipping stuff up, from my own experience, and this is mostly anecdotal data I've collected, your dissolved oxygen is gonna max out around maybe 9 ppm. When you use a little carb stone or oxygen stone and go pure oxygen in your starter, you're gonna get it up into the 15 to 18 range. I think that's nice for a starter. I don't really aerate my must, especially when it's this thick anymore. I usually do that through pump overs and punch downs. So, but if you have the oxygen, it's not going to hurt. and I recommend it. Tempering and growing, I talked about that already. Don't be in a hurry. Just don't be in a hurry. Make sure that thing's ready to go. If you don't see the activity and it's not wanting more and it's not sizzling like bacon, then maybe your temps were a little off, or something's not right. So if your starter's not looking crazy happy, then it's not ready to go into that big expensive batch you're about to make. Process efficiency. So pre-firm juicing, I'm going to try to go quickly here a little bit because I'm sure I'm going to be long-winded. Pre-firm juicing, that's a method I know a lot of people use. I don't really use it much. I have. I'm more of a post-firm juicer. But pre-firm juicing is fantastic. I know a lot of awesome mead makers that make great pre-firm juiced meads, which basically is squeezing out the juice and using that like you would in a sizer to make your mead. And then you can also control your tannin additions from the fruit skins by removing the pomace and using that, throwing it back into your mead and separating it. It's a lot easier to figure out your estimated original gravity that way, because you're pretty much taking all the liquid and sugar out of the solids prior. I don't really use this method very often, but I have, and I still do a little bit, and it has its value for sure. And I know a lot of people do it, and it's great. Post-firm juicing is mostly what I do. I come from a red wine background. As you can see here, I have a hydro press. I generally press out my fruit like this, and I get max extraction. Towards the end, kind of like in a red wine, I separate the very tails of my pressings, and 99% of the time they go back into the batch. But with more tannic and dark fruit, when you have a lot of seeds collecting in your press, sometimes I'll separate it just so I can blend it in if it gets a little bit too tannic or acidic. Usually it's the tannins that are going to get you, and some different vegetal flavors you can possibly get depending on how long the fruit's been on there. So I like to post firm juice or press, so to speak. Enzymes, I Lalzyme EX, I use it. I like it. I think it's great. This isn't a Scott's Labs commercial, but I have seen huge improvements in extraction. And when you're not using a lot of water or none at all, you need as much liquid from that fruit as you can get. So I definitely recommend that. Straining bags, man, there's a plethora of ways to do that. Secondary fruit, I oftentimes use giant hop bags, and bags can be amazing, but then you have to pick them up out of there, and you got to let the liquid drain, and you got to deal with these giant bags, and it's got its own challenges. But man, if I could put everything in a giant bag and have a forklift pull it out for me, that would be great. Findings, I don't find too much. I don't use bentonite in fruit bombs at all. I know a lot of people that do, and that's totally fine. Occasionally I'll use Kieselol chitosan, or and that's usually at after tertiary time, when it's had its own time to clear. But they can be very, very, very useful, especially when you have a stubborn hazy kind of fruit. Also, the enzymes, pectic enzyme or Lalzyme EX, will definitely help with the hazier fruits, and you get more maximum yield from those fruits when you're using those enzymes. Patience is paramount. Let gravity do the work. Man, I really don't like rushing stuff, even commercially. I'm pretty much about 6 to 12 months out right now. That's what we spent the first 2 years doing, is making mead like that for this style. So I generally don't release a fruit bomb minimum of 6 months from start to finish. And I prefer a year, and I'm getting to that point where it's turning into a year for a lot of things. And oftentimes those sit in barrels for a while too. But patience is paramount. It takes time for gravity to do its job. It takes time for everything to drop out. So that's a real key thing. A lot of times when I rack off and I press fruit, most of the free run and the main pressing goes into one vessel. And then when I get to the nitty gritty and the nasty stuff, it goes into a smaller one. And then the really nasty stuff goes into an even smaller one. And then those take their time and they clear out. And then we rack all those into another one. And we're kind of just building the blocks into one accumulation. But on a large scale, this is a lot of money on retail wise. And so maximizing my yield is very important. Fermentation additions. What do I like and what do I use? I talked about Lalzyme and other enzymes. I'm definitely a fan of Lalzyme. It's pretty much all I use. I'm a pretty simple guy. Opti red, Opti white. You know, with that much fruit, I don't even know. I use it because it's fairly inexpensive and it doesn't hurt. So I'm not going to claim to be a pro on that. But I have enough fantastic mead makers that I know that use it and have done a lot more experimentation than I have, to where I just trust them and use it because the expense outweighs the risk of not using it, in my opinion. Definitely not a necessity, but it doesn't hurt. That's my opinion. Fermentation tannins. I will use some other Scott Labs products in that regard. I have played with it, and I do think it does help with a lot of fruits. So I recommend playing with a variety of their different tannins, the FT Blanc, the FT Citra, the FT Rouge. Lots of different options there, and I think they all have their place. That's a personal preference. Acid additions, I'm not the guy to talk to on that. I get it all from all those fruits you see on the floor drain there, and that's how I like to do it. Nothing wrong with playing with acid additions, though. It's just not what I do. I like oak. That's what I use for a lot of my tannin additions, in addition to what the fruit skins and the seeds will do. So oak, when done right, just, I love it. And it's a natural fining agent as well. It clears things a little bit, especially barrels. And it does really, really melt things together and add a little weight to the mouth feel. And you know, especially American oak, which is still one of my favorites, America. I love the vanilla flavors I get and the coconut notes, and I love spirit barrels. I go on and on. It's a whole other presentation. The chemistry of a big fruited melomel. I love the fact that they're low pH, high alcohol, and they have a lot of tannin structure. It makes the need for sulfites and stabilization very minimal. I'm not going to get into a big thing about stabilizing, but you know, regardless of how many ppm of SO2 you add prior to bottling, the most important thing is that the pH is down there where it's even effective, and the alcohol is high enough to where it's not a very inhabitable microbial environment. Okay, I think I'm getting about 45 minutes here. So I just kind of, this is something I haven't really ever done. I remember I screenshotted this. I kind of just looked at it and giggled a little bit, but this is kind of how I'd figure out a real simple, like homebrew. This is a recipe I made. I've never made a recipe in my life. I'm kind of a little bit scratch on the cave wall with a rock kind of person, and I learned through just doing it a lot. So, but I do use this calculator a lot, and I think it's great just for really simple calculations. And this, I don't really get, there's a ton of features on the Got Me calculator that I don't take advantage of, but this just shows you this is a recipe I made and this is how I used it. But this is kind of an example of saying, putting the data in there. So all these, the blueberry, the blackberry, the red raspberry here, I put in the quantity in pounds. That's how I use in pounds, because the algorithm in this program is really good at figuring out volume for pounds and efficiency. So I have found, I don't know why it's good. I just know from my lab testing and my own estimates, it's been pretty on. So I'm happy it's here, and I hope it doesn't go away. But as you can see, custom sugar contribution, 12% for the blueberry, 11.5 for the blackberry, 11 for the red raspberry. This makes a big difference. Kind of did a generic honey. My generic's usually 82% sugar, and I'm going to do 5 gallons. That gives me a 1176 starting gravity. That's a very common starting gravity for me, and I go up all the way to 1.2 and some change. So that's where you get into the challenging parts. But I want you to see that you have basically 27 pounds of fruit in this recipe, and that's going to be just under 3 gallons of volume. And then you're looking at 20 pounds of honey, which is going to bring you up, to, what, 1 3/4 of a gallon of honey there, 1 2/3 of a gallon. So you pretty much have about maybe not even a half a gallon of space left, if my head math's correct, of just water top off, and then water for your yeast starter. So this is kind of an example of a max fruit mead. And I want to kind of clarify here that this is a 5-gallon batch. And when I say 5-gallon batch, I mean total volume when everything is in it. So right now we have 27 pounds of fruit in a 5-gallon batch, which is going to be roughly what, 5.5 pounds per gallon. So when people are saying 10 pounds per gallon of fruit, they generally mean that they're putting that in, in something they're not including the fruit volume into the mix. The most fruit you can really put into a mead if you want to have any room for honey is going to be maybe 7 pounds, unless you're going to juice it and remove the solids. So that's that's just to show you where I'm going. And then I made this really cheesy home brew recipe for people if they're interested. That's super simple. And it's kind of funny. I read it today. So just quick going over that. Freeze and thaw the fruit. After maybe, depending upon, if it's in one bucket, I'm going to add the Lalzyme as soon as it starts thawing with just a little bit of warm water. And I'm going to try to mix it up. I'm going to put the lid back on loosely. I'm going to wait another day and let it break down, mix it up. As it's thawing, I'm smashing it, I'm breaking it down. And usually this takes about 2 days in a 4 or 5 gallon bucket. I'm going to weigh out my honey. I'm going to try to warm it up. I said to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, that's a safe number to warm honey up to, in my opinion. Introduce it into the fruit slurry, and I'm going to stir it all up. I'm going to divide it into the different buckets if you have more than one, or in a homebrew 5-gallon batch case, I'm just going to put it in the one bucket. Mix all that stuff up. I'm going to add in my Opti Red, a little bit of water as per the directions. In this case, real simple ambient temp ferment, 20 grams of yeast. That's going to be 4 grams per gallon, DV10. DV10's very good at ambient temperatures. That's why I made this. I made this with a home brewer in mind. This is just a top of the head recipe, so take it for what it is. Hey, if you win a comp, you're welcome to not give me credit. Top it off with a little bit of spring water or some filtered water of your choice from your house to the 5-gallon mark, and then there you go. Always add the remaining water later, because you never know how much volume that fruit's actually going to take. For simplicity's sake, I did 15 grams of Fermato up front at pitch. I do staggered nutrient additions oftentimes in traditionals and things like that. I kind of go more, usually I split my nutrient additions into 2, sometimes 1. I'm kind of back to 2 right now. That's the way I do it. If you want to stagger it and use Tasna, that's fantastic. Tasna's great. It works awesome. You're not going to be able to go wrong with Tasna. Commercially, for me, it's a little simpler to put it up front or just do 2 nutrient additions. I generally go at 24 and 72 hours if I do 2. But I've had success doing 1. It just makes it simple. It's kind of the red wine background in me. So this is just for people who don't want a lot of things to think about. So you can replace that with whatever you want. Punching down the cap 3+ times a day. I think punching down the cap, mixing that stuff up is important. 3 times plus a day means you could do it 10 times a day. It's fine. There's no risk in oxidation in the early stages. Mix that stuff by all means and get that stuff homogeneous and flowing around. Now here's what's interesting is if you want to stop the fermentation or slow it down, when it gets to where you want to and you get a juice out of there and you take the gravity and you find it's 14 or 15%, or maybe you want it to go to 16, or maybe it stops and slows down. I don't think you can stop it, but I remove the fruit around close to its alcohol tolerance. I'll press it at that point, like red wine style, like I showed in the picture. And then I take all the solids out and then I let it hang out. At that point is when I do my first SO2 addition of 50 ppm. I don't do that thinking it's going to stop anything. It's simply because a lot of times there's massive headspace. Sometimes I just want to kill anything that's done during the pressing process. And I think it's just, it gets bound immediately anyway because of all the solids still left in suspension. So I'll do that, and then I just let it hang out, and I let it do its thing. I'm not going to sorbate it or anything like that. I'm going to let it do its thing. Oftentimes, it might take off and go to 18%. Sometimes it's going to pretty much stop. Sometimes it's going to creep up a little bit, but time is the best indication of stabilization. So when it starts dropping out, you'll know. If it goes to 16% and you like it, cool. You can always add some honey back in if it's not sweet enough. You can always add more fruit. So that's pretty much that. I just did that for any people who have not used a lot of fruit and may want a real simple thing to just get them started. So yeah, it's a little picture of a little video of a punch down there. That is why I like to do a lot of pump overs, and I'm very well known for filling fermenters too full. I guess I like to live on the edge a little bit. But that is Elliot, and Elliot requires about 6.25 pounds of blueberries per gallon and about 4.5 pounds of orange blossom per gallon. So not a whole lot of room for the water that you need for the starter and everything else, just enough to get it moving. So that was what that press you saw earlier was. And recap and Q&A. I think I'm at 52 minutes and 30 seconds here, so I did okay. And those are some beautiful red raspberries. So I guess, is this the time, Sergio, when we can take some questions?
Yes, absolutely. I was about to chime in here. All right, yeah. So, I mean, we just have a handful of questions here. I think some of the questions that were asked were covered, but I mean, just for the sake of it, we don't have too many here. Um, and first and foremost, also, I forgot to mention at the beginning of this presentation, but we wanted to give a special thanks to Timothy Lever. He was actually our sponsor for today's presentations. He graciously gave us a sponsorship for the conference. So I just wanted to give him a really great shout out. Thank you very much for the support in that sponsorship, Timothy. So yeah, as far as questions we have, Timothy actually has one. I believe you brushed on this, but he was asking, how about pectic enzymes for the fruit?
Okay, yeah. So if I do something with peaches, mangoes, high pectin content, I have used pectic enzyme. However, what I do believe, and I'm not a scientific pro on this, is that Lysozyme EX does have pectic enzyme in it, as well as several other enzymes of the organic nature. So generally, I've had pretty good luck using Lysozyme EX, which is pretty much your staple in the meadery. But in the past, especially as a home brewer, pectic enzyme for peaches was a pretty obvious choice, and definitely for that mango haze. So yeah, nothing wrong with pectic enzyme.
All right, great. Another question here from Jordan Guerrero. He says, "Is there any way to? I'm sorry. Is there a good way to quantitatively calculate or estimate tannins?"
With your palate. That's the only way I know. And yeah, I mean, there probably is. That gets a little more scientific than I'm qualified to answer in that regard. And there's some people that are much more qualified than me in that. And for me, it's mostly about balance. That's where the art comes in for me. I basically do the process just to get to the artistic part of it, which is really my passion. So yeah, tasting and how, just knowing, how much grip you want and how much contribution you're going to get from seeds of the black raspberries or the skins of the black currants.
All right, very cool. Let's see here. Jordan Guerrero also asks, how do you prevent clogging using whole fruit? And I asked for clarification on that. He was referring basically to clogging the outlet of your fermenter when moving it to a secondary vessel.
Okay, yeah. So I look for fermenters with minimum of 2-inch dump ports. So we have a 2-inch TC with a butterfly valve that gives you about 1 inch on each side of the valve. And most fruit is broken down enough to where I can generally get it going. With the blueberries are broken down enough where I can recirc, and most of the berries aren't going to. I'm mostly recircing the liquid, but my flexible impeller pump on stuff like black currants that won't pull it out of the bottom. We basically have a 2.5-inch flexible impeller pump that we vacuum out of the top of the fermenter, and it just acts as a vacuum and sucks the fruit out, which goes right into the outlet into the press, and then we press the fruit, and then the fruit gets compacted like you saw on the previous slide into a nice hard pomace that then goes to compost and a pig farm that we know.
Very cool. All right, we also had a question asking about pump recommendations. I believe I know which pump you use. I think we actually spoke about this between the two of us out at MeadCon last year or whatnot.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
So, if you had any pump recommendations?
Is it, I think it's American Wine Pump, right? Is that what you use?
Yes. Yeah, American Wine Pump. Yeah.
Yeah, they're out of, I believe, Kenosha, Wisconsin. Man, fantastic company. I can't say enough about them. I have their bow peller, which is a centrifugal pump for transfers, and then I have their 2.5-inch flex impeller. And from what I've seen, your only other options are going to be Italian pumps, European pumps, which you're paying a lot for the importation, and the customer service is lackluster when you have a problem. The flex impeller guys at American Wine Pump are amazing. You can call them on their cell phone and talk to them, and they stand behind their product. It's all made, by U.S. workers here in America. A lot of the parts come from the USA, which I'm a big fan of. I'm not opposed to import stuff either, but it is cool to be able to talk to the person that makes it. So I love supporting those guys. I would recommend their products all day and night.
Yeah, they are great people, great customer service, great products. I will say also their pumps are extremely easy to take apart and clean.
Oh yeah.
Compared to the our first pump here, that was an imported Italian pump. Compared to that, this thing's a breeze. If you ever needed to change out the flex impeller,
Yes.
the impeller itself, it's super easy to do. Super easy to do a thorough clean out of it, which is good to do every once in a while.
Yes.
And also their pumps by default come with like a wireless remote, which is hands down way better than a corded remote on like a 20 or 30-foot cord that you always have to round up everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, for the money, even for the money, you can't really beat it. It's not. They're about the same price from what I've done of anything comparable from Europe. And I think the quality from you have probably more experience with this than me, but from owning probably, doing it longer, but the quality is just there. I have a real good appreciation for their engineering. And yeah, like you said, the swap out parts is great. We ordered a spare impeller for ours when we got it. We haven't had to change it yet, but we take it apart and clean it all the time. And when we learned you could just take it apart and clean it, we're like, oh, this is great.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Tri-clamps. Yeah, tri-clamps, everything slides apart. You can also, it just as an added note, and I found this out when I needed to have hot liquid when I was doing especially a lot of my tea meads or anything that was hot steeping, or some of my beer style meads that I needed to transfer while still being at high temp. They do also sell a high temperature impeller that you can substitute.
Okay.
So I actually just asked for that by default. So that's my impeller is a high temp version. So they have that as an option.
Yeah, that's really cool. And it's funny because when we ordered it as a must pump, and I didn't even realize in my mind that it could handle, reasonable amounts of honey and concentrate as well. And oh my gosh, when we had our, we got a 50 gallon drum of organic pineapple, and putting that in the 5-gallon buckets to put in our little freezer was amazing with that, because it made a little bit of a mess, but it happened in about 10 minutes. A lot better than the old scoop with a pitcher method. So
yeah, no, for sure. Let's see. Here's another question. With using whole fruit, do you have a preference for conical versus flat versus slanted vessels?
So yeah, I've had all of them a little bit. I'm kind of leaning towards the newest fermenter I use for whole fruit is a 1550 liter, I believe, Oddball. And it's made by Latina, branded through GW Kent. And it's a red wine fermenter, so it has a really large slope bottom, flat into the front, manway going to the front. And I like that because I can scoop out the fruit, and when I drain all the liquid, I can open the door and I can really get it out with a dump tray or like a collection bin. So I do like that. But I've used them all. I mean, definitely a real conical, or if you get into like, I like real conicals after I press it, because you can really clog even a conical, because it's just condensing the fruit at the end, in my opinion. Usually I pull the liquid through a passageway that's created with the liquid in any full drain tank for wine. And then after that, we have bright tanks or conical, beer fermenters that are jacketed on the bottom. And those are great for clearing like the fine lees and all the leftover fruit matter that gets through the press screen. So I don't necessarily, I like the slope bottom, I think, recently with the front port, so I can access it easy, and I can scoop it right out the door and there's not a huge lip on it. I think I like that the best right now.
Yeah, for if I had to go back in time, I purchased all of my fermenters with a conical bottom. Just a conical wine fermenter, not a beer conical. Um, if I had to go back in time, I would get all slanted, just because for the main part, when you're doing clean in place and circulating, hot, cleaning solutions
Yeah.
and sanitizing solutions, those conical bottoms, what they do is they create a vortex, and if you're not adding enough
Oh, yeah.
liquid in there, it just you just get a huge like air gap in there, and
Right. Yeah.
it's a pain in the butt. So if I had to go back in time, I would get slanted vessels for sure.
Yeah, we have our first two slanted, and so far they're winning for our next purchase.
Mhm. For let's see, Josh Holdbrook, he asks for post fermentation pressing. Do you press immediately when you reach terminal gravity, or do you wait a set amount of time?
So it really depends. If it's an aggressive fermentation and it's going a little faster than I wanted it to, sometimes I'll press it just to in my mind get a more accurate reading on what it is. Because if it's at 14% already and it went fast, depending on the circumstances, I'll press it because I have a good idea what it is. Because the liquid's extracted, and then I'll monitor it after that and its next tank. Otherwise, I love it when they quit on their own. I think it's great. And then sometimes, I didn't really talk about this, but sometimes they quit earlier than you want them to, which is a different kind of challenge. And that's a matter of then it maybe possibly adding more fruit or diluting. But I haven't really got to that point yet. Usually that's only happened in low pH stuff, which means there's enough acid to really balance the higher residual sugar than I targeted. But for the most part, I it with my method, just from my own experience and the stuff I make, it pretty much gets to where I want it. And then kind of like I wrote in that little generic recipe for people, you get to where you want it, like 14 or 15% is a generic term, press it at that point. So then you can really monitor the gravity and get a good idea. Because after you press it, you might actually lower the gravity. It might be lower than you thought or higher than you thought, because sometimes there's still sugar in the fruit that didn't ferment. Sometimes there's still liquid that didn't get extracted. So I don't really feel like I get a real accurate reading until I press it.
All right. Timothy Lever asks, what about post fermentation fruit additions?
Yeah, I mean, I like doing that stuff for sure. I didn't talk about it a lot because when you're talking max fruit, in my opinion, you're kind of putting as much fruit as you can with minimal dilution. It's a pretty much a maximum ratio. So if you're going to do post fermentation additions, you're always, unless it's concentrate or something that's more concentrated, it's always going to have you're always going to be diluting your product. So I think it's great, especially if you go too far and you want to add more fruit and lower the alcohol. You can throw more fruit in there after you press it. For sure, I've done that, but you got to be real mindful of your calculations if you want to get accuracy. So yeah, I'm down with all of that. I try not to do it unless it's part of the recipe. And a lot of times when I do post secondary fruit, usually it's when I go dry and do the back sweetening method. I generally don't do it with residual meads because then I'm diluting it with a lower sugar, higher water addition, and then kind of, in my opinion, reducing the body that I wanted.
Very cool. Let's see. Scott Kurtz, he asks, I'm sorry. Yeah. What brands do you recommend for fruit presses and wine fermenters? Well, fermenters you already kind of.
Yeah, I use fermenters. I've used all the imports. I really like I really like the Latinas for the price point and the quality of the build. There's nicer ones out there, you're going to pay for them, and there's cheaper ones out there, and you're going to pay for that in other ways. So I've used the Marchiosos. I've used I think Speedle makes good stuff, or Spidel, however you want to say it.
Very expensive though.
Yeah, they're very expensive. I use a lot of their regular HDPE plastic 300 liters and 200 liters just to for small batch stuff on a kind of like I've seen you do a lot on pallet racks and stuff. I love those for that purpose, but for primary, we've cheaped out on some secondary variables, and I hate them, and we're pretty much getting rid of stuff and going all Latina because we found for the rule of diminishing returns, the Latinas really give us what we want for the money. We get our stuff through GW Kent generally, because it's in Michigan here and it can get here in a day. There's only I think 4 dealers in the US that sell Latinas anyway. So GW Kent's where we go, and most their website's a little meh, but they do have most of their stuff on the website at least to look at now. And yeah, I mean, I don't know a mead maker or a winemaker who likes any of their everything about their supplier. There's definitely a lack of a great, fantastic industry-focused supplier in the mead world. Not like the beer world where there's a lot of custom options. There's not a lot of people making custom wine tanks. So, yeah, for me, Latina is great. What was the other thing? The press. Yeah, I use. I've had a couple presses, but the ones I use now, I believe, are made by Speedle, and they're from More Wine. More Wine Pro is where we get them, but you can get them on the regular More Wine website. We have a 90 liter, and then we have 180 liter. The 90 liter is what we started with. The 180 liter is what we use now for about like a 1,200 pounds of fruit batch, which could be like 160 gallons or so, to a 220 gallons, depending upon the fruit. I'm looking at probably running generally about 2 or 3 press cycles off the big one. So it's still almost a whole. It's a lot of work to press a big batch, as you probably know. Yeah, I like that bladder press from Speedo. All you need is a water hookup. I've modified mine a little bit to make it easier because 5-gallon buckets don't like to fit under it. And I've extended my legs. The 180 liter is on hinges and it's on wheels, which is really nice, but it's a big mama. And just to clarify for people, because it's probably another question, is we'll run free run through the press and use the straining bag that's in the press because it's lined with a bag. And that we run our free run through that, and it collects a lot of the stuff until we get to the whole fruit. But most of the time, we'll put a bed of fruit cap we take off the top on the bottom just to act as a filtration media so it doesn't clog it up. But that's a whole nother art form, is trying to press fruit. It's a pain in the butt.
Matthew Mead asks, any concerns about oxidation when moving to secondary and pressing out the fruit?
Okay, Matthew Mead. Well, I think Matthew Mead knows my answer to this. He's delightfully trolling me, but I definitely don't have any concerns. I do add the 50 ppm of sulfite, but that's more to mitigate anything I pick up during the pressing as far as other bugs. Most of the stuff I do at that point is at a high enough alcohol content and pretty acidic. My fruit bomb stuff is generally on the lower pH side. And for those big fruited means, I mean, I have a raspberry coming out that's, it's 3.2. I mean, that's so acidic, really. The risk of oxidizing something that's a 3.2 pH off the first press when there's a lot of bound CO2 is so minimal. I wouldn't even talk about it. It's tiny. That your biggest risk in oxidizing something is going to be introducing oxygen after it clears and all the bound CO2 escapes, and then letting it sit there for a long time and brown. But that can be totally mitigated with just headspace control, obviously.
I have 2 questions for you for myself. Coming from somebody who rarely goes over, 1150, 1160 starting gravity. Is there any more things to worry about as far as stabilization when you're finishing off with that much higher of residual sweetness?
I think there is when you're talking lower alcohol. We never had a fruit bomb re-ferment on us, much past like just finishing off kind of as it would if we coaxed it a little bit. But I think my biggest thing is our protocol now is to press it out, let it hang out, taste it, forget about it, taste it, forget about it, take data on it once a week, and collect that, and then see if it moved at all. And once it stabilizes on paper, I'm pretty comfortable, especially when it's down. I even got away from, I don't filter these meads anymore because by the time I'm done at 6 months plus, they're so clear in general. And I'm a advocate of filtering. I mean, I just filtered a Lahua Blossom today and it's gorgeous. And it went through 4 filtration cycles. So I'm definitely a filtration advocate, but for these dark fruit bombs, process efficiency and I don't want to lose the mead really. Especially if it's a smaller batch. But I don't. Yeah, we will sorbate still if it's higher pH, especially. Uh, but I don't know if you have experience titrating stuff like this with the high residual sugar is very inaccurate. You kind of have to get it lab tested to get an accurate reading of the free SO2. The equipment I have, I just have the Hana titrators, and it's all bug nutty when you have that much residual sugar. It does not like it at all. So I don't feel comfortable knowing how much SO2 is in there, but I'm not really worried about the oxidation. As far as the reform goes, the only one we've had when we started in a bottle was a back sweetened strawberry mead that was dried out, secondaried, and then back sweetened, and then supposed to be sterile filtered and looked like clear as a glistening sun, and then it turned out to be a cork pusher. So I actually get more scared about back sweetening than I do about the residual because I'm introducing new stuff into the mix. With the residual stuff, as long as it stays stable for 4 or 5 months, doesn't move, and it's totally clear, and it gets racked. I probably racked these things 4 to 5 times. So yeah, I don't really worry about it anymore. And then I also bottle probably at least a month ahead of time. And then a little thing of note is we also do sous vide baths at 90. That's an idea I got from my buddy Adam Lynch at Standard Meadery that he got from his buddies in the beer world. Is a sous vide bath at 90 degrees Fahrenheit with your bottles for a few weeks to encourage any sort of microbial or re-fermentation, and then check the gravity after that. Check for any signs of refirm. And if you're good after a few weeks in a sous vide bath at 90 degrees, you're probably going to be okay. We also vacuum cork, which I'm a big advocate of, which also helps oxidation. So yeah, all those things combined, I'm pretty comfortable with it now. My biggest peace of mind is definitely just time and patience. Some guys I know, man, they turn these things fast and they get real chewy meads, and there's a lot of particulate left in there. That makes me nervous as hell. I can't do that because I've seen too many problems with that. But hey, I mean, I'm not judging. If you can make the product and turn it that fast, more power to you. But that makes me nervous. So I definitely wait for it to clear and stabilize for several months.
Yeah, yeah. The only way to sleep at night for me is absolute cartridge filtration right before it goes into a bottle.
Yeah, that was my way. But the only thing I had that re-fermented was a 0.5 or 0.45, cartridge filter filtered, and it's the only thing I've had re-ferment on me, so it kind of screwed me up.
Yeah. As far as nutrient additions, with that much fruit, how are you calculating about how much yan you add, or are you just adding kind of like a a standard dosage rate?
Yeah, I mean, I'll use the TAS 3 calculator quite a bit. I love it. I think it's a great tool to type in all your data. And I don't necessarily always use it, but I'll use that as a starting point. And then for a first batch test of stuff, and then I usually end up cutting it because it's really difficult to tell. And I know you've done. I mean, you have a lot more experience on the research on this one. I kind of been tailoring my nutrients down as I go because I feel like maybe I've been talking to my buddy Adam Lynch again at Standard Meadery about this because we talk a lot about these things. We kind of share a lot of tricks and experiences with these styles, but I feel like sometimes I have a lot of high ABV meads, and I like them that way, but I know they're not always commercially likable because sometimes when people taste alcohol, they say, "Oh, it's hot, it's boozy." For me, I'm like, "Oh, this will be great in 5 years." But yeah, without having to go that high, I kind of, as long as I'm not getting, I know I've used too many nutrients in the past, but I usually cut it. I'll usually cut it. I feel like I feel like I think like the little recipe I gave was about 75 or 80% of what was recommended on the Tosna 3.0. And that's with DV10. And I think that's pretty much like about what I'll do. I usually cut it a little bit down. I've been playing with little experimental things though, where I've been cutting even more out. Um, I just haven't had the balls or the time to really do the experiments with even less, because what works works. But yeah, I'm not super. I don't titrate yan. I would love to. It's in the future plans when we have a lab guy that does it full time. But oh man, that's super nuanced and cool. And I wish I had more time to give you a better answer.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, at the end of the day, admittedly, it is all a guessing game when it comes to the actual yam contribution that from however much fruit you're using, because it could vary even with the same fruit from crop to crop, and it is what it is. So yeah, I was just curious to know exactly how you might calculate how much.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely rely on. I mean, a go-to, like I said, a go-to for me would be the Tosna calculator, just to get general ideas. But I mean, I think like I'm on the top of my head right now. I think I've narrowed it down pretty much for a big, like 6 pounds per gallon fruit bomb. I'm doing about 2.5 grams of ferment O per gallon, which is a little bit on the lower side. Um, it's probably more like 65% of what Tosna 3.0 would recommend. Um, and I started doing that. I started lowering it, and that's kind of where I'm at now, because stuff was just attenuating way further than I wanted it to. So I'm seeing if maybe the little bit less nutrients, I can control that aspect and kind of get it to quit a little earlier. So I think it's more of a factor of targeting the residual sugar, less of a factor when you're drying it out.
I agree. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I've played with that myself. From Tosna, the first version of Tosna was way too high,
Yeah.
based on numbers that I found elsewhere. But yeah, I toned it down big time from there. But I at one point I did play around quite a bit with with just that fine tuning nutrient additions to get me X amount of gravity point drop.
Right.
And that's what I kind of like dialed everything down to.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what I really want to. That's when the real lab comes, which is in the hopefully next year. I mean, we got a dusty lab equipment right now because of obviously obvious reasons, staffing and time. And I was more into lab stuff as a homemaker than I am now, because if there's a problem, I fix it, and then I move on and make more mead. And but I mean, I have so many experiments I want to do, and we have a great shout out to Brendan Benninger that comes in here, and he's our production guy a couple of days a week, and works at tasting room. But he's a biologist, and he's going to be my go-to lab guy once we can give him the space and time and not have him do all the other stuff we need him to do. Because I would love to start titrating in and really, like you said, just dial it in, and get that anecdotal experience because I think if we can control that, we can have a much more reliable way to, quote unquote, I say that lightly, halt fermentation. I hate to say that, but to really get it to quit where we want it to, and kind of get it to its stated yeast tolerance range.
Yeah, just tailor it a little bit more.
Yeah.
All right, and the last question. Luckily, this was the last presentation for today, so it doesn't really matter. Dan Slort asks, what do you age in stainless steel or oak or neutral oak barrels?
That's a great question. All of the above. Usually for the first racking, after I press, it'll go into a variable capacity tank. And I usually won't float. I won't float the lid on the liquid. I'll give it a couple inches so I don't get a messy lid, for selfish reasons. And I'm out, it's still gassing off and sometimes still fermenting. So I'll let it go right back into another stainless. Usually, ideally temperature controlled, because I didn't really talk about it, but I will use some temperature as well, to slow down the fermentation. Although I don't rely on that, you can. I've had great success with keeping stuff cold and then racking it again, if I'm really desperate to get it to chill out. But like I said, this is only to mitigate it from continuing to go nuts. And then time is the only teller, months and months, if it's really stable. So I'm not telling anyone that cold crashing it, stabilizing and bottling it in a couple of weeks is that's definitely a no in my opinion. But yeah, I use that. I use stainless variables. Um, I do use this, like I said, the Speedles. I love the plastic Speedle, 300 liters and 200 liters. I feel like we never have enough of them. I love those because they do permeate a little bit of oxygen, and for these high tannin, high acid meads, I am fine with some microoxidation. And so I really do like those for like tertiary, so to speak, or like third, fourth racking. That's usually what they live a good 3-4 months in prior to going down to the bottling barrel, we call it. Um, so yeah, and in oak, all about oak. I don't have space to do a lot of neutral oak now. We have about 32 barrels right now, space for 32 barrels, and they're all like spirit barrels and wine barrels and whatnot. But I definitely, we're looking at a new place right now to expand some operations, and I love a new neutral oak idea. John Talkington at Birmingham, does a lot of that, and I think it's fantastic. Fantastic way to add body and just overall uh, great microoxidation characters to your mead. So I love neutral oak. I love neutral oak barrels. I do use oak cubes in some things because maybe I don't have a barrel space open. But I'm starting a project with our Elliott mead where I'm going to do cuvées of years and start getting actual mead barrels, which is starting this year. And then we'll be pulling from those every year and we'll reuse them and we'll start having these mead barrels, and then hopefully some hyped stout beer guy will use one and sell some mead.
All right, very good stuff. Well, I'm sure if we were all in a conference room, you'd get a great round of applause. So great stuff. Thank you for taking the time to do this, and thank you for everybody for participating in today's presentations. We'll continue MeadCon virtual or MeadCon online, whatever you want to call it, next week. And again, every Wednesday night, we'll have 2 presentations, and stay tuned. All right. Thanks again, Tony. And thank you again for everybody who participated today.
Hey, thank you, Sergio. I really appreciate you and Greg putting this together, and cheers to you all, and hope everyone's safe and healthy. We'll see you around.
Great. Have a good one.
Take care.